What would you do if you were the President of the United States for one day? I'm sure in today's political climate there are lots of possible answers to this, but not many people get the opportunity to be the President of the United States for one day. That's where today's story comes in, kind of. You see, I was in a secondhand bookshop the other day and I stumbled upon this gem. This is 2,201 Fascinating Facts by David Lewis, and it was published in 1983, 13 years before I was born. And a book that was almost published 40 years ago is going to have some, perhaps a little more dubious facts in it after 40 years of human understanding and science changes. But I thought it was worth a look. And one of the facts really jumped out at me. And after flicking through it in the bookshop, I just had to buy it. And it goes like this. A man named David Rice Atchison was President of the United States for one day and didn't know it. According to a 19th century law, if neither the President nor the Vice President was in office, the President pro tem of the Senate became Chief Executive. On March 4, 1849, President James Knox Polk's term had lapsed, and the newly elected Zachary Taylor could not yet be sworn in. It was a Sunday. So, for one day, Atchison was president. It was not until several months later that Atchison learned of this, as the law was then an obscure one. It has since then been changed. What a fantastic tale. And I was thinking I could make a video about how, we need to change laws and things when they don't make sense or when we have a good reason to do so that they can be changed, and I could go into those details. And then I thought I'd better just check that this is actually true. And it turns out that this is a fantastic tale, but it's also a fantastical tale because it's not true. David Rice Atchison was born on the 11th of August 1807 in Kentucky, where he grew up and eventually studied law at university. In 1830, he moved to Missouri, where he began practicing law. He served as legal counsel for the fairly new Church of Latter-day Saints movement, or Mormonism, where at this point in time there was a lot of Mormon rhetoric. The Mormons were being driven out of Missouri, and Atchison was a part of their legal defense. His defense for them extended beyond just being a lawyer, though. He was also a brigade general, or a general in charge of a brigade, trying to maintain order during anti-Mormon violence. Later on, he served as a court judge, and in 1843, he became a senator. And I will mention briefly that whilst he was a defender of Mormons in Missouri, you might think that that was a character trait for him, to be looking out for people who had less rights or who were being treated unfairly. But unfortunately, that's not true, especially when it came to the civil rights movement. Atchison was staunchly pro-slavery. He not only had slaves on his plantation in Missouri, but he also was campaigning against the civil rights movement. He was so pro-slavery in his work that a group of pro-slavery settlers in Kansas named their town in his honor for all of the things that he was doing to continue slavery. Much of his legacy now is that he was a proponent of slavery, but that's not what today's story is about. How did this senator become known as a person who was president for one day? Well, it has to do with the 1849 transfer of presidency, as well as the presidential line of succession. Let me explain. As the fact that we read before stated, that President James Knox Polk's term ended at noon on March the 4th, 1849. At 6:30 a.m. that day, he wrote in his diary that he officially concluded his presidency. But March 4 in 1849 was a Sunday, and President-elect Zachary Taylor wished to observe the Christian Sabbath and be inaugurated the next day at noon on Monday the 5th. So President James Knox Polk's term lapsed at midday on March 4, and Zachary Taylor's term didn't commence until noon on March 5. So that begs the question, who was president in the 24-hour period in between? As our book says, it was David Rice Atchison. At the time, according to the Presidential Succession Act of 1792, the Senate President pro tempore immediately followed the Vice President in the line of presidential succession. The Vice President of the United States is the President of the Senate. Senate President pro tempore is a title given to a member of the Senate who's elected by the members of the Senate to be the temporary President of the Senate when the the vice president is absent. Atchison was popular amongst his senatorial colleagues and was elected to be president pro tempore 13 times during his time in government. On March 2nd, 1849, Vice President George N. Dallas took leave for the remainder of the session. So, as our Book of Facts states, Atchison was the Senate President pro tempore and was therefore next in presidential succession after the Vice President. The President and Vice President's terms ended at noon on March 4, so it goes to reason that Atchison would be President until the next one was sworn in. At least, that's the narrative that several different newspapers picked up on and reported, and also why there are plaques stating this fact, why Wikipedia's disambiguation of President for One Day redirects to David Rice Atchison, and why it was even published in Ripley's Believe It or Not. But Ripley, I do not. And here's why. The consensus from experts, scholars, and historians is that Atchison was not president for a day, and there are lots of reasons why. Let's start with some of the more pedantic ones. The Constitution grants Congress the power of declaring what officer shall then act as president in the case of removal, death, resignation, inability, both of the president and vice president. It doesn't declare that someone actually becomes the president. They just act as the role of president. Moreover, no one had died, been removed, resigned, or were unable to continue as the role of president or vice president. Their terms had ended. There's also some discussion about when the term actually ended. The Constitution at the time didn't state a date or a time when the president's term ended. It just said that they would be in office for 4 years. It didn't say 4 years to the day. It was a little ambiguous. In 1933, that was amended, and now the president's term ends on the 20th of January at noon following an election. So there are some semantical issues as to why he wouldn't have become the president, but even if you ignore those, there's still a more significant one. At noon on March the 4th, the same time that the president and vice president's terms expired, Atchison's title of Senate President pro tempore also expired. There just aren't any real reasons for him to be the president for that one day. Legally, practically, and the fact that nobody viewed him as president, not even Atchison, really tells you something. From what we can tell from a statement that Atchison gave the Lever paper sometime afterwards, was that he and the Senate knew that for one day, after the noon on March the 4th, the country was either at interregnum, where there is no government, or he was the president. They didn't take it too seriously. They knew there was another president coming in on the Monday, and they kind of joked around a little bit. In fact, at 3 a.m. that morning, Atchison reported that Willie Mangan, a judge and senator from North Carolina, burst into his room and asked him to make him the Secretary of State, in a joking manner. Atchison went on to say that he didn't perform any of the tasks of the president. He didn't get sworn in, and he didn't consider himself the president. There might be some problems with having the Senate President pro tempore being next in line after the Vice President. Not least of which being that it could mean that you end up with a member of the opposition party as the president. That doesn't feel very democratic. In 1886, Congress passed a new Presidential Succession Act, which removed Senate President pro tempore from the line of succession. But it was added back in 1947 under President Truman because he thought that the first few people in line should be elected officials. So Senate President pro tempore was added back onto the list, but after the Speaker of the House of Representatives. But why is there a false fact in this book? In the early 20th century, it was very clear there was a great consensus that David Atchison was never president. He never acted as president. So why is it in this book? Well, I can imagine that when compiling a list of facts, 2,201 of them, and you find a newspaper clipping or a plaque or a statue that claims that David Rice Atchison was the president for one day, well, you can feel fairly comfortable including it in here. But it turns out that the journalists got it wrong, and then came the plaques and the statues. The papers had gotten it wrong, they got excited by the story, and probably didn't run it by too many constitutional experts. I'm not an American. But from what I can tell, constitutional law is complex. So I'm not surprised that different sources got it wrong. But I do appreciate that we have experts who dedicate years of their lives to very specific subject areas and can enlighten us into these things. Not just situations like this one, but all situations. Experts help our world become a better and more factual place. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that when searching for answers like I have done today, it's important to seek out experts and resources created and curated by experts so that we can be getting the very best knowledge and the truth. There's only so much time in this world that we can be learning things in, and having experts help us to navigate things which are far too complex for us to get our heads around on our own. Experts sharing their knowledge is just so valuable and helpful for us. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it and you learned something and found it interesting. If you'd like to see more videos about lots of different interesting things, please consider subscribing to That's Pretty Cool, where I love to dive into things that capture my curiosity and wonder and share them with you. And this was one of those times. So thank you once again for watching. Take care, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.